I call Simon O'Connor.
I was so stunned by those comments that it just took me a few seconds to rise. But can I actually start by acknowledging Mr. Phil Twyford, seeing that today is his birthday. I think it's always good to show some, comity, if we will, not comedy, across the House and acknowledge his birthday there. Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to take a call on this Local Government Auckland Council Amendment Bill number 3, down in the name of Alfred Naro, and we'll come to him quite happily in a moment. But this, like a few members, is my first call on this bill, and very pleased to take it for two reasons. The first being an Auckland Member of Parliament and very involved and interested in the activities of the local board, in my case Ōrākei, which is part of the Tamaki electorate. And secondly, because I'm all for good electoral and constitutional structures, so I think it's a timely bill. I want to acknowledge in then starting, particularly Maggie Barry at the start, who initiated this bill, and as the member who now holds it, acknowledged at the start, she handed it over to him when she became a minister. And Alfred Naro, being the man he is, a lucky man, had it pulled from the ballot and has now had the opportunity to take it through all 3 stages in the House. And I understand, bar one party, we will see this pass through Parliament tonight, if that's not presumptuous on my part. But to Alfred, to say thank you for bringing this here, for the leadership that it takes. I've often reflected on these members' days. I've often reflected in these members' days. It's actually a rare event to get your own bill drawn out of the ballot, and rarer still. I actually have had one bill drawn from the ballot, very happy, around the Joint Family Homes repeal bill. I am not going to torture the opposition by describing what the Joint Family Homes repeal did. I would love to, Mr. Simpson, but I'm occasionally a generous man to the opposition. But I'm grateful for the opportunity to do that slight tangent. But look, to Alfred, thank you for leading it through the House. I think it's a rare opportunity, but one that should be rightly taken. I want to acknowledge as well the chair of the Select Committee. I don't actually sit on local government and environment. I primarily chair the Health Committee, but to Scott Simpson, the fine Member of Parliament for Coromandel, thanks to his leadership, I think it's useful that while he's a man of the Coromandel, lives in the Coromandel and serves the Coromandel, he does know about Auckland and knows about the council structures, having been engaged in Auckland, particularly through matters of politics over the year. Look, to get to this bill here tonight, we've had around, sorry, I have to check my notes here, that's right, 17 written submissions came in. I have to say that's quite a goodly number of submissions, particularly for a bill of this nature. 10 of those were in support. They're asking what's in it. Look, I'm going to elucidate that for you, Mr. Farfoy, in a few moments. You can, yeah, that's right. You could even move that I get extra time. But, oh, I know, and think there's 5 minutes more. The excitement is palpable. So, 17 submissions, Mr. Speaker, 10 of those in support, and my colleague Sarah Dowie, who's changed seats with my colleague Brett Hudson, had noted actually one of those is the Auckland City Council. Notably, 3 submissions were against, but quite tellingly they were people who actually are already in the situation of being on 2 or more boards. Now, a generous interpretation of that indicates that they have insights into that, but also it plays into what a number of submitters supporting the bill indicated, that there's a potential conflict of interest and a perception of a conflict of interest. So now that we've done the preparatory work describing the starting elements of this bill, we need to touch on, for the sake of some members opposite, what's the whole purpose? Ultimately, this bill is about not holding two local board positions. I think to most people in this House, and certainly listening in, it's an intuitive understanding that actually if you are going to serve your local community, and in particular in Auckland, you should sit on just one local board. I have to say, when I think there's 7 members of the Ōrākei local board in my area, when I think about the work that they do, And in that space, I'm thinking of just dealing with the various numbers of parks in my electorate, residents associations, business associations. Landslips occasionally, not so often in Tamaki, fortunately. But what I'm trying to indicate is when I think about the work that those 7 individuals do, it's actually an enormous job in just that singular ward, in this case of Auraki. When I think of the number of parks, it really is a job that can only be satisfactorily done, in my opinion, by, well, one person in this particular space. The idea that the people responsible for the parks or engagement with the residents' associations in Auraki would also have responsibilities to other areas, it becomes a little bit unwieldy, shall we say. We also have on the other side of that conflicts of interest that can arise. So a little bit of my electorate takes in the ward of Mangakiki Tamaki. And actually, when I look at those 2 areas, they're actually slightly different in their priorities. And just for the sake of example, so in the Auraki ward, or the main area of my Tamaki electorate, the area of intensification of housing and so forth, infrastructure and transport is a somewhat fraught area of discussion at times. Whereas if I move into the south of my electorate, in this case into a different ward, that of Mangakiki Tamaki, the issue of development of rail links, of infrastructure, of infill housing is actually quite acceptable. So it's the difference, if you will, between Auraki and St Heliers and the likes of Glen Innes and Panmure. So how is it, if a person was able to sit on 2 boards, and let's say for argument's sake that's Auraki and the Mangakiki Tamaki board, how would they manage those conflicts? How would they actually bring a singular perspective across those 2 boards? And I'm not convinced that is possible. I think what is important to draw out, though, in the bill, and it's a subtlety which I think shows the quality of thinking that Alfred, in particular, but the Select Committee has brought to it, is that this is actually not banning someone strictly from standing for more than one board. It's just that they cannot ultimately sit on more than one board. It's a subtle distinction, but an important one. So ultimately, a person is able in the upcoming elections to put their hand up for more than one local board if they so choose. But fundamentally, and quite importantly, Mr. Speaker, they're going to have to prioritise. And a speaker, I think it might have been Jamie Lee Ross, the MP for Botany, touched on it a bit earlier. That's going to be quite a strong statement to the communities they seek to represent. If a person standing for the local boards is prepared to rank and say, hey, in my case, let's say, again coming back to my local areas, the Auraki ward is the first priority, Mangakiki Tamaki is second, and the Waitemata third. It could potentially be a brave person. For whom does the bell toll, Mr. Speaker? That's right. Yes, it's for thee people. Oh, gosh, where's the classical literates when you need them? But look, it's actually going to be a very brave person who does that. But look, fundamentally, this bill is simple insofar as it's asking for effectively a singular action, and it makes perfect sense to me that someone should not be standing for two roles. We've heard some vitriol, particularly from New Zealand First speaker tonight, drawing out what they thought were some contradictions. I would not normally go here, but I do have to point out to that member and that party that one of its members was elected a Member of Parliament and chose to remain on board appointments. So I think we just need to put out, if we're going to start pulling punches, if you will, at one side, to make sure you've got things on your own side in order. And secondly, and very importantly, and I think most members in the House will relate to this, if you're going to stand up in front in a third, second or first reading, granted going backwards in this case, you need to also have your voice heard in the Select Committee. That is the right place for members of this House to raise their objections to a bill like this one around local government, to voice that strongly in Select Committee, and then of course, even if you don't get agreements, to then bring that back to the House. But it's a little bit rich. Exactly, you can't easily be silent in a Select Committee and then come on some moral high horse here in the Parliament as a whole. Look, in concluding, and I know that's going to bring great sadness to many on the other side, I can feel it from here, but this is a good bill. To Mr Naro, thank you for taking the time to develop this bill, to work with this bill, to shepherd it through Parliament. I think this is a good bill. Again, I particularly notice it's been well welcomed by the Auckland Council. And the final encouragement is actually when it comes to elections, to, regardless of one's political hues, to have a number of people stand for local body elections.
Sorry to interrupt the member,
House.
it's tragic, but his time's expired.